The smoke rose in columns, black and thick, blotting out the morning sun. Katya Olinik stood at the edge of the evacuation zone, her hand gripping her daughter's shoulder with a force that would leave bruises later, though later would turn out to be a concept neither of them could count on anymore. Around them, the city of Bakhmut dissolved into chaos. Car horns blaring, children crying, the crack of distant artillery that came in waves, rhythmic as breathing, relentless as time. The air tasted of ash and diesel fuel, acrid enough to burn the throat with each inhalation. Lena, 8 years old, dark-haired, carrying a stuffed rabbit missing one ear, looked up at her mother with eyes too old for her face. "Mama, where's Grandma?" Katya didn't answer because she didn't know. 3 minutes ago, her mother had been right beside them, clutching a canvas bag filled with documents, medications, the things you grab when the world gives you 10 minutes to pack a life. Then the crowd had surged, bodies pushing forward toward the evacuation buses, with the desperate momentum of people who understood that staying meant dying. And when Katya had turned back, the old woman was simply gone, swallowed by smoke and panic and the terrible mathematics of war. But something else was wrong. Something beneath the obvious chaos. Something that made Katya's skin prickle with an instinct she couldn't name. She felt eyes on her. Not human eyes, but the sensation of being tracked, studied, measured. Like standing in the crosshairs of something unseen. The morning before, 12 hours earlier, the city had still been pretending. Shops remained open, though their shelves grew emptier each day. People walked their dogs, though the walks grew shorter, confined to routes that avoided the eastern sectors where shelling had turned streets into sculpture gardens of twisted metal and collapsed masonry. Katya had taken Lena to school, because what else could she do? Keeping routines intact felt like a small act of defiance, a refusal to let war dictate every moment. The teacher, Mrs. Bondarenko, had pulled Katya aside. The woman's hands shook as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is the last day. They're ordering evacuation. Military sources say the offensive will reach the city center within 48 hours. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. "Get your family out tonight if you can, tomorrow at the latest." Katya had nodded, numb, because the news wasn't news. It was confirmation of something she'd felt building for weeks, the pressure increasing like water behind a cracking dam. She'd gone home and told her mother, who'd looked at her with the stubborn expression of a woman who'd survived Stalin's famine, Chernobyl's radiation, and the chaos of the Soviet collapse. "I'm not leaving," Grandma Helena had said. "This is my city. I was born here, and You'll die here if you stay." Katya's voice had been sharper than intended, sharpened by fear masquerading as anger. "Is that what you want? To die in a basement while Russian artillery turns your home into rubble?" The argument had lasted hours. But in the end, necessity won. It always did. By midnight, they'd packed what they could carry: clothes, documents, photos, Lena's stuffed rabbit. Katya had stood in the doorway of their apartment. 3 generations had lived in these rooms, and felt the weight of everything she was leaving behind press against her chest like a physical force. They'd left at dawn. By noon, they were trapped in an evacuation convoy, moving at a crawl toward the western edge of the city. By 2 p.m., when the shelling started in earnest, the convoy had become a stampede. That was when Katya noticed the dog, the shepherd. He was massive, a German shepherd, dark sable coat matted with dirt, ears alert, eyes the color of amber, scanning the crowd with an intensity that felt almost human. He wore a tactical vest marked with Ukrainian flag patches and the word Politia, police, though the vest was torn, one strap hanging loose, as if he'd torn himself free from something. A K9 unit dog, separated from his handler, lost in the chaos like everyone else, but he didn't move like a lost animal. He moved with purpose, weaving through the panicked crowd, nose low, tracking something. Every few meters he'd stop, head lifting, ears swiveling, body going rigid, as if he'd caught a scent or sound that demanded his complete attention. Katya noticed him because Lena noticed him, her small hand pointing. "Mama, look, the police dog." "Don't touch him, Malyash. He might be dangerous." But even as she said it, Katya knew it was a lie. The dog radiated not aggression but focus, the kind of disciplined alertness that comes from extensive training and an unshakable sense of mission. He wasn't lost, he was searching. The dog stopped suddenly, 20 meters from where Katya stood with Lena, his entire body tensed, tail dropping, hackles rising. A sound emerged from his chest, low, sustained, the growl of a creature confronting something it recognized as threat. But there was nothing there. Just smoke, just people, just the terrible ambient noise of a city eating itself alive with war. Then the dog turned and looked directly at Katya. Their eyes met across the smoke-filled distance, and something passed between them. Not understanding exactly, but recognition. The dog's expression held urgency, desperation, the need to communicate something beyond words. He took 3 steps toward her, stopped, looked back the way he'd come, then toward Katya again. "He wants us to follow him," Lena whispered. "Don't be silly, he's just confused, frightened." But Katya's voice lacked conviction, because she felt it too, the sense that the dog wasn't moving randomly, that his behavior carried intention, purpose, a meaning she couldn't decipher but couldn't ignore. The crowd surged again, pushing Katya and Lena toward the evacuation buses. When she looked back, the dog was gone, swallowed by smoke and chaos. But the feeling remained, the sensation of being watched, tracked, pulled toward something she couldn't see. That was the moment Grandma Helena disappeared. The realization. It took 30 seconds for Katya to understand she'd lost her mother. Another 10 to panic. Another 5 to force the panic down into a box she could lock away and deal with later. Because panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not with Lena clutching her hand, not with artillery getting closer, not with the crowd pressing forward like a living thing with its own desperate momentum. She pushed against the flow, Lena stumbling behind her, trying to retrace their steps. Faces blurred past, old men clutching suitcases, young mothers carrying infants, teenagers with hollow eyes that had seen too much too soon. None of them were Grandma Helena. "Mama!" Katya screamed, her voice swallowed by the ambient roar. "Helena Olienik!" No response. Just the relentless forward motion of people who'd learned that stopping meant being trampled, that hesitation was death dressed in different clothes. Katya's mind raced through terrible possibilities. Her mother had fallen, been knocked down, crushed underfoot. Her mother had gotten confused, wandered the wrong direction, gotten lost in side streets where artillery strikes came without warning. Her mother had... The dog appeared again, closer this time, staring at Katya with those amber eyes that held too much intelligence, too much purpose. He barked once, sharp, commanding, the bark of an animal accustomed to being obeyed, then turned and ran into the smoke, toward the eastern sector, toward the direction everyone else was fleeing from. "He knows," Lena said, her voice small but certain. "He knows where Grandma is. That's impossible, he's just a dog. He doesn't—" But Katya stopped because it wasn't impossible. K9 units were trained for search and rescue, trained to track scents through rubble and smoke, trained to find people when all human methods failed. If the dog had caught her mother's scent, if he was tracking Grandma Helena, but tracking her where? And why would the old woman go that direction, toward the danger instead of away from it? Unless she hadn't gone willingly. The thought hit Katya like cold water. What if her mother had been pushed, jostled, carried by the crowd's momentum into a side street? What if she'd fallen and been separated not by confusion, but by physics? By the simple, terrible mechanics of too many bodies moving too fast in too small a space. A shell hit something half a kilometer away. The sound was immense, final, the kind of noise that makes ears ring and hearts stop. The crowd screamed, surged, became even more dangerous in its desperation. And through it all, the dog stood waiting, looking back at Katya with an expression that seemed to say, "Are you coming or not?" She made the decision in less than a heartbeat. Made it the way all impossible decisions are made in wartime, by accepting that every option carried a cost too high to calculate, and choosing the one that felt least like abandonment. "Stay close to me," she told Lena, gripping her daughter's hand tight enough to hurt. "We're following the dog." They pushed through the crowd, moving perpendicular to the flow, drawing angry shouts from people who thought they were cutting in line, who didn't understand that Katya wasn't trying to get ahead. She was trying to go back, trying to move toward danger, trying to find one old woman in a city falling apart. The dog led them into the smoke, and the smoke swallowed them whole, into the grey. The smoke changed everything. Sound became muffled, directions meaningless. The line between sky and ground blurred into uniform grey. Katya kept one hand locked around Lena's wrist and the other outstretched, feeling her way along building walls that appeared suddenly from the haze like ships emerging from fog. The dog moved ahead of them, never more than 5 meters distant, visible only as a dark shape that occasionally solidified into recognizable form before dissolving again. He moved with absolute confidence, never hesitating, never doubling back, following some invisible trail that only he could perceive. They'd left the evacuation zone behind. The crowds thinned, then disappeared entirely. Now they walked through streets that had been abandoned hours or perhaps days earlier. Apartment buildings with shattered windows, cars left at angles suggesting hasty departure. A child's bicycle lying on its side in the middle of the road. The silence was worse than the chaos had been. At least chaos implied life, movement, the possibility of survival. This silence felt like aftermath, like the pause between heartbeats in a dying patient. "Mama, I'm scared." Lena's voice was small, nearly lost in the ambient hum of distant artillery. "I know, Malyash, me too. But we're going to find Grandma, and then we're going to—" The dog stopped, went rigid. That growl started in his chest again, deeper this time, vibrating with a frequency that made Katya's teeth ache. She froze, pulling Lena close. "What is it? What does he—" Then she heard it too, voices. Men speaking Russian, not Ukrainian. The accent unmistakable, the words carrying clearly through the smoke-thick air. "Evacuate my ass." "They're not evacuating. They're fleeing like rats, makes our job easier. Command says to hold this sector. Let them funnel west, then close the trap. And the civilians?" A pause, then command didn't specify. Katya's blood turned to ice. She pressed her hand over Lena's mouth, pulled them both against the nearest building wall, making themselves as small as possible. The voices grew closer, boots on pavement, the mechanical click of weapons being checked. Russian forces here, in this sector, which meant the city had already fallen, or was falling, or the lines had shifted in ways the evacuation coordinators either didn't know or hadn't had time to communicate, which meant she'd led her daughter directly into enemy territory. The dog's growl intensified. His lips pulled back from his teeth, every muscle coiled for violence. But he didn't attack, didn't bark, didn't draw attention. Instead, he turned and looked at Katya with an expression that conveyed urgency, bordering on desperation. "Move. Now. Follow me." He slipped into an alley, disappearing into shadows. Katya didn't think. Thinking would have paralyzed her, would have forced her to confront the impossibility of their situation. She simply moved, pulling Lena with her, following the dog into darkness that smelled of garbage and something else, something sweet and wrong that she didn't want to identify. Behind them, the voices continued, oblivious to how close they'd come to discovering a Ukrainian woman and her daughter in a sector that was supposed to be cleared. The building. The dog led them through a maze of alleys and side streets, moving with the confidence of a creature that either knew the city intimately or possessed an internal compass humans lacked. They emerged in front of what had once been a school. Katya recognized the faded murals on the walls, the small playground equipment now twisted and scorched from some recent explosion. The building's facade was partially collapsed, the ground floor exposed like a dollhouse with its front wall removed. Through the smoke, Katya could see classrooms frozen in time, desks still arranged in rows, a chalkboard with the last lesson still visible, children's artwork pinned to a bulletin board that had somehow survived the blast. The dog didn't pause. He went directly to a gap in the rubble, a space barely wide enough for a human to squeeze through, and disappeared inside. "Mama, we can't go in there, it might collapse." Lena was right. The building was structurally unsound, held together by chance and steel rebar that groaned under stress. Entering it was insanity. But the dog had gone inside, and if Grandma Helena was in there— "Stay behind me," Katya whispered. "Step exactly where I step. Don't touch the walls, and if I say run, you run. Understand?" Lena nodded, her face pale but determined. They entered the building. Inside, the smoke was thicker, trapped by collapsed ceilings and blocked ventilation. Katya's eyes watered immediately, her lungs rejecting the air. She pulled her shirt over her nose and mouth, gestured for Lena to do the same. They moved through what had been the main hallway, past lockers hanging open like broken teeth, past doorways that led to classrooms now filled with rubble and broken furniture. The dog's barking came from somewhere ahead, muffled by intervening walls but unmistakable in its urgency. Katya followed the sound, her heart hammering so hard she could hear it in her ears. They found him in what looked like it had been a cafeteria. The tables were overturned, the kitchen area blackened by fire, and in the corner, partially hidden behind a fallen beam— "Grandma!" Helena Olinik lay on the ground, conscious but clearly injured, her leg bent at an angle that made Katya's stomach turn. The canvas bag she'd been carrying was still clutched in her hands, held against her chest like a shield. When she saw Katya and Lena, Relief flooded her face. "Ditochka," she breathed, "my child, you shouldn't have come. You should have—" She stopped, wincing. "Gotten on the bus, saved yourselves." Katya knelt beside her mother, hands already assessing the injury. Broken ankle, possibly worse. No blood, which was good. But moving her would be agony, and the building was unstable, and they were in enemy-controlled territory with no way to call for help. "What happened? How did you end up here?" "The crowd, it pushed me into a side street. I tried to get back, but then the shelling started and I ran for cover. Found this building, thought I'd wait until it was safe to—" She stopped, face twisting with pain. "Then part of the ceiling came down, trapped my leg. I've been here for, I don't know, hours?" The dog sat beside Helena, panting, his tail making a single weak wag as if to say, "I found her. I did my job." Katya reached out and placed a hand on the dog's head, feeling the warmth of fur, the solid reality of bone and muscle beneath. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you." But gratitude wouldn't get them out, and the building groaned again, a deep structural complaint that suggested collapse was not a possibility, but an inevitability. The impossible choice. "Can you walk?" Katya asked, though she already knew the answer. "I can try." Helena attempted to rise, gasped, went pale. No, I can't. It's... Boja, it hurts." Katya did the calculations automatically, the terrible math of disaster. Her mother weighed perhaps 60 kilograms. Katya could support that weight in ideal conditions, but not through rubble, not while also keeping track of Lena, not while avoiding Russian patrols and navigating a structurally unsound building. She would have to choose. Take her daughter and leave her mother, or stay with her mother and risk all three of them dying when the building finally gave way. It wasn't a choice. It was cruelty dressed in logistics. "We'll find another way," Katya heard herself say, though she had no idea what that way might be. The dog barked, sharp, insistent. He moved to the cafeteria's far wall, pawing at something, the same behavior he'd displayed when finding Grandma Helena. Katya followed and found what the dog had discovered. A service door, partially blocked by debris but not completely. Through the gap she could see another room, darker, filled with machinery, probably the building's maintenance area. And beyond that, faintly visible through smoke, daylight. "An exit. There's another way out," she said, voice rising with desperate hope. "If we can move this debris—" She pulled at the rubble, blocking the door, hands tearing on rough concrete, nails breaking, not caring. Lena joined her small hands grabbing pieces too heavy for her to lift but trying anyway. And the dog dug, claws scraping at the base of the debris pile, widening the gap centimeter by centimeter. They worked for 5 minutes that felt like hours. Behind them, Grandma Helena watched, her face a mask of pain and guilt and helpless frustration. The building groaned again, louder this time, dust raining from the ceiling in streams that caught the light filtering through cracks. The gap widened, became large enough for Lena to squeeze through, then for Katya. But Helena... "Go," the old woman said quietly. "Get my granddaughter out, I'll wait here. When you reach safety, send—" "I'm not leaving you, Katerina." The use of Katya's full name made it a command, not a suggestion. "You have to choose. Your daughter or your mother. That's the choice war gives you, and you know which choice to make." Katya looked at Lena, who stared back with eyes that understood far too much. Then at her mother, who'd lived through 70 years of history and survival and loss. Then at the dog, who watched them all with an expression that seemed almost human in its comprehension. And she realized she didn't have to choose, because the dog had already decided. The shepherd moved to Helena's side, lowered himself into a crouch, and looked at Katya with an expression that communicated as clearly as words. "Put her on my back. You can't be serious, he can't carry—" But the dog remained still, waiting, his body language radiating the kind of calm certainty that came from extensive training. K-9 units were taught dozens of specialized skills, carrying wounded soldiers in tactical harnesses, dragging victims from collapsed buildings, moving weight that exceeded their own body mass through techniques refined by generations of breeding and practice. The dog could do this. The question was, did Katya trust him enough to let him try? Outside, closer than before, she heard voices. Russian again. Coordinating movements, securing the sector, doing the methodical work of occupation. Time had run out. "Help me," Katya said to Lena, making the decision. They positioned Helena on the dog's back, the old woman crying out as her broken ankle shifted. The dog stood slowly, carefully adjusting to the weight, muscles bunching under his coat. And then he moved toward the gap in the debris, carrying a wounded grandmother on his back, navigating through space so narrow that Katya had to hold her breath, watching him squeeze through. He made it, disappeared into the maintenance room. Katya and Lena followed, crawling through the gap, emerging into darkness that smelled of oil and rust and old machinery. The dog was already moving toward the exit, toward daylight, toward a future that still existed somewhere beyond the smoke and rubble and war. They followed him into the light. The handler's perspective. Lieutenant Dmytro Kovalenko had been searching for his dog for 6 hours. Rex K9 unit designation, UKRP 447, Belgian Malinois Cross, 3 years old, trained in explosive detection and search and rescue, had disappeared during the evacuation chaos when a shell impact had torn through their police convoy, flipping vehicles, scattering personnel, turning an organized withdrawal into a panicked rout. Dmytro had been thrown clear, spent 10 minutes pulling a wounded officer from a burning vehicle, and when he'd turned back to retrieve Rex, the dog was simply gone. No body, no blood trail, just the empty tactical vest torn free and left behind like shed skin. 6 hours. In war, that was a lifetime. Dogs could survive longer, but not in urban combat zones where artillery fell without pattern and Russian forces consolidated control street by street. Every passing minute decreased the probability of recovery by measurable percentages that Dmytro's training forced him to calculate even as his heart rejected the math. He'd stayed behind when the rest of his unit evacuated west. Stayed because leaving meant accepting that Rex was dead, and acceptance felt like betrayal. He moved through the city's eastern sectors with the methodical pattern of someone who'd spent 3 years working alongside an animal he'd come to think of as more partner than pet. His radio crackled. "Kovalenko, this is command. What's your position?" "Still in Sector 4 Echo, no contact yet. And you need to pull back. Russian forces have secured that grid. You're in enemy territory. Acknowledged. I need another 30 minutes. So you don't have 30 minutes. Artillery bombardment scheduled for that sector in 20. You need to... Dmytro switched off the radio. He knew it was insane. Knew that dying for a dog, no matter how well trained, no matter how many operations they'd worked together, violated every principle of tactical sense and survival priority. But Rex wasn't just a dog. He was a partner who'd saved Dmytro's life twice. Once in Mariupol when he'd detected an IED before Dmytro could step on it. Once in Kharkiv when he'd alerted to an ambush seconds before it sprung. You didn't abandon partners. Not while there was still a chance. Dmytro rounded a corner and stopped dead. Through the smoke he saw movement. A dark shape carrying something on its back, moving with the careful deliberation of a creature bearing precious cargo. Behind the shape, 2 smaller figures followed, one supporting the other. His heart seized. "Rex!" The dog's head lifted. Even at 50 meters, even through smoke, their eyes met, and recognition flared between them. Handler and K9, human and animal, the bond forged through countless hours of training and operations. But Rex didn't come. Didn't abandon his current mission to return to his handler. Instead, he kept moving, kept carrying the old woman on his back, kept leading the family toward the western edge of the sector. And Dmytro understood. His dog had found a new mission. Or perhaps the mission had found him. He ran to catch up, weapon lowered, hands visible, not wanting to startle the civilians. When he reached them, he saw their condition. Exhausted, smoke damaged, the woman on Rex's back clearly injured, the child, 8 years old, dark-haired, staring at him with eyes that had aged decades in hours. "I'm Lieutenant Kovalenko, Ukrainian police. That's my dog." He nodded toward Rex, who wagged his tail once but didn't stop moving. "What happened? How did you—" The younger woman, 30-something, fierce-looking despite her exhaustion, spoke quickly, words tumbling over each other in her urgency to explain. She told him about the evacuation, the separation, the collapsed building, how Rex had found her mother and carried her out. Dmytro listened and felt something shift in his chest, pride mixing with a kind of awe he didn't have words for. K9 units were trained for specific tasks, yes, but what Rex had done went beyond training. He'd adapted, improvised, taken initiative in a fluid situation with no handler to guide him. That wasn't just training. That was intelligence, that was choice. "We need to get you to the evacuation point," Dmytro said, checking his watch. 15 minutes until the scheduled bombardment. "Can you walk faster?" "My mother can't walk at all, and I don't think the dog can carry her much further. He's exhausted." Dimitro looked at Rex, at the way his legs trembled with each step, at the foam around his mouth, at the determination in his eyes that overrode the physical limits of muscle and bone. The dog was running on nothing but will now, pushing past exhaustion into the territory where animals sometimes died from exertion. Then we improvise. He pulled off his tactical vest, unbuckled the straps, started fashioning it into a makeshift stretcher. "Help me. We'll carry her together." The bag. As they transferred the old woman from Rex's back to the improvised stretcher, something fell from her grip. The canvas bag she'd been clutching since the evacuation began. It hit the ground with a sound heavier than cloth should make, and the contents spilled partially. Papers, photographs, a small wooden box. Katya reached to gather it, but Dimitro's hand shot out, stopping her. His face had gone pale. "Don't touch that." His voice carried an edge sharp enough to cut. "It's my mother's bag. It's just documents and don't touch it." He knelt, examining the wooden box without making contact. Then carefully he opened it with the tip of his knife. Inside nestled in cloth ammunition. Not standard issue, rare caliber, the kind used by specific Russian sniper units. And beneath the ammunition, wrapped in plastic, a radio transmitter, compact professional grade, the kind used for coordination between ground forces and artillery spotters. The silence that followed felt like the air before lightning strikes. Dimitro looked at the old woman on the stretcher, his expression shifting from concern to something colder, harder. "Where did you get this?" I don't know what that is. That's not my—" Helena's voice broke, her face registering genuine confusion that looked authentic but might not be. Katya's mind reeled. The bag. Her mother had been clutching it since the evacuation started, had refused to leave it behind even when falling, even when injured. Katya had assumed it contained important documents, family photos, the things people save when the world burns. But this, someone planted it, she said, voice tight. Someone put those things in her bag. She wouldn't. But even as she spoke, doubt crept in. Because wars created traitors. Because desperation made people do impossible things. Because collaborators existed, and they looked like anyone, like everyone, like grandmothers carrying canvas bags. Dimitro's hand moved to his sidearm. "Ma'am, I need you to understand your situation. That transmitter is military grade. It's been used recently. I can see the battery indicator, which means someone has been coordinating with Russian forces, providing targeting data for artillery strikes." His voice remained level, professional, but underneath it ran a current of barely controlled rage. Ukrainian civilians have died because of intelligence provided by someone using equipment exactly like this. "It's not hers." Lena's voice, high and desperate, cut through the tension. "My grandma wouldn't hurt anyone. Someone put it there. Tell him, Mama." Katya looked at her mother, searching the old woman's face for truth, for answers, for something that would make sense of this nightmare layered on nightmare. And what she saw was genuine confusion, mixed with dawning horror as Helena understood what was being implied. "I've never seen that box before," Helena whispered. "The bag, someone gave it to me at the evacuation point, said it was from the coordination office, said it had my medical records inside because I'd need them at the reception center. I didn't even look inside, She stopped, face crumbling. "Oh God, someone used me, someone planted it and used me as a mule." Dimitro's jaw tightened. He picked up the radio transmitter with a cloth, examined it more closely. His expression shifted subtly, anger giving way to something more complex. "She's telling the truth," he said finally. "This transmitter has a timer function. It's been broadcasting automated signals on a loop." He looked at Helena with something that might have been sympathy. "You weren't operating it. You were carrying it. Someone gave you a bag with a live transmitter inside, knowing you'd move through the city, providing mobile signal triangulation for artillery targeting." The implications crashed over Katya like cold water. Her mother hadn't been lost in the crowd by accident. She'd been separated, pushed into specific sectors, trapped in the collapsed building not by chance but by design. And all the while, the bag she carried had been broadcasting their position to enemy artillery. They'd been marked for death, used as bait, turned into unwitting participants in their own execution. "Who would do this?" Katya's voice came out raw, broken. "Who would use civilians like this?" "Collaborators, people who've decided their survival is worth more than their neighbors' lives." Dimitro's face was stone. "We've seen it before. People who provide targeting data for payment, for protection, for promises that they and their families will be spared when the city falls." He looked at the transmitter again, then at Rex, who'd been sitting quietly during the exchange, head cocked, watching the humans with an expression that seemed almost knowing. "Your dog found her," Katya said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "He tracked her, but he wasn't tracking her. He was tracking the transmitter, the electronic signal." Dimitro nodded. "K9 units can be trained for multiple specialties. Rex is cross-trained in explosives detection and search and rescue, but his primary specialty is electronic sniffing, detecting active radio signals, cell phones, surveillance equipment." He looked at his dog with renewed respect. He sensed the transmitter, recognized it as a threat, and instead of alerting me because I wasn't there, he made the choice to track it himself, to lead you away from danger, even though that meant moving toward the signal source. Rex wagged his tail once, as if to confirm, "Yes, that's exactly what I did." The truth compounds. "We need to move," Dimitro said, checking his watch. 10 minutes until bombardment. The transmitter's been broadcasting long enough that Russian forces have triangulated this position. They know we're here, and they're about to rain hell on this entire grid. But Katya's mind was still processing, still putting pieces together. Wait, if the transmitter was planted on my mother at the evacuation point, that means someone at the coordination office is a collaborator. Dimitro's voice was flat. Someone with access to evacuees, with authority to hand out official-looking bags, with the knowledge of which routes people would take and where they'd seek shelter. The scale of the betrayal was staggering. Not just enemy forces attacking from outside, but traitors working from within. People who looked Ukrainian, spoke Ukrainian, pretended to help while actually marking targets for destruction. How many others? Helena's voice was barely a whisper. How many other people were given bags? How many families are carrying transmitters right now, thinking they're carrying medical records or documents, not knowing they're being used as human guidance systems for artillery? Dimitro's face answered before his words did. Too many, far too many. A shell hit 3 blocks away, the ground shook. Dust rained from the partially collapsed buildings around them. The bombardment had started early, or the schedule had changed, or their position had been deemed important enough to justify immediate targeting. "Run!" Dimitro commanded. "Now!" They ran. Katya and Dimitro carried Helena between them, the improvised stretcher cutting into their hands, their shoulders. Lena ran beside Rex, one hand on the dog's collar, the animal pacing her, adjusting his speed to match the child's shorter legs. Behind them, the neighborhood they'd just left dissolved into fire and smoke, and the terrible sound of buildings becoming rubble. More shells fell. Closer. The Russians were walking the artillery barrage toward them, adjusting fire, bracketing their position with the methodical precision of spotters who could see the target, or who had electronic signals to guide them even through smoke and chaos. The transmitter in the bag, still broadcasting, still marking them. Dimitro stopped, made a decision, and hurled the entire bag into a burning building they passed. The flames would destroy the electronics, would silence the signal, would hopefully buy them the seconds needed to break contact and disappear into the urban maze. They kept running. Rex led the way, nose to the ground, navigating by scent and memory and the inexplicable animal sense that seemed to know where safety lay. They crossed streets filled with rubble, ducked through buildings with walls blown out, moved through spaces that had been homes and shops and schools just days earlier. And finally, impossibly, they reached the evacuation zone, the western edge of the city where Ukrainian forces still maintained a perimeter, where buses waited with engines running, where families clustered together with the exhausted relief of people who'd survived something they still couldn't fully process. Medical personnel rushed forward, taking Helena from the stretcher, loading her onto a gurney, asking questions in rapid Ukrainian about her condition and injuries. Lena clung to Katya, both of them shaking with exhaustion and shock and the aftermath of adrenaline. And Rex sat beside Dimitro, panting, his tongue lolling from his mouth, his eyes half closed with the kind of bone-deep fatigue that comes from pushing past every physical limit. But he'd done it. They'd made it. Everyone was alive. The collapse of time. The medical tent was chaos organized by necessity. Stretchers arranged in rows, nurses moving with practiced efficiency, doctors triaging wounds with the cold calculation of people who'd learned to measure suffering in terms of who might survive versus who would die regardless of intervention. Helena lay on a cot, her broken ankle being set by a field surgeon who worked with the kind of gentle roughness that came from treating hundreds of similar injuries. Lena sat beside her grandmother, holding the old woman's hand, her stuffed rabbit clutched under her other arm. Katya stood outside the tent, watching the ongoing evacuation. More buses arrived every 20 minutes, loading civilians, departing towards safer territories in the west. She should have been relieved. They'd made it. They were alive. The nightmare was over, but it wasn't over, because somewhere in this evacuation zone, among the coordinators and officials and volunteers helping process refugees, was a collaborator. Someone who'd planted transmitters in bags. Someone who'd marked families for death. Dmytro appeared at her side, Rex walking beside him, the dog's head lowered with exhaustion. "Your mother's going to be fine. Broken ankle, some bruising, dehydration, nothing that won't heal." Katya nodded, not trusting her voice. "But we have a problem." Dmytro's tone shifted, became grimmer. "I reported the transmitter to command. They ran diagnostics on the signal logs. In the last 6 hours, 17 similar signals have been broadcasting from this evacuation zone." He paused, letting the number sink in. 17 families, maybe more, all carrying planted transmitters, all marked as targets. The enormity of it hit Katya like a physical blow. 17 families, children, elderly, pregnant women, all turned into unwitting bait for Russian artillery. "How many have already been hit?" she asked, dreading the answer. "We don't know yet. Communications are fragmented, but the bombardment patterns suggest—" He stopped, jaw tightening. "Multiple casualties. The collaborator has been using evacuees as mobile targeting beacons for days, maybe weeks." "Who would do this? Who could—" Katya's voice broke. "Someone who believes their survival depends on cooperation. Or someone ideologically aligned with Russian occupation. Or someone being coerced. Family held hostage, threats made." Dmytro's face was stone. "War creates monsters, but it also creates victims who become complicit to avoid becoming casualties." Rex shifted, a low whine emerging from his throat. Not fear, not exhaustion. Something else. The dog's ears swiveled, tracking sounds Katya couldn't hear, his nose working the air. "What is it, boy?" Dmytro's hand moved to his sidearm instinctively. The dog pulled forward, straining against the leash, moving toward the coordination tent, the central hub where evacuees checked in, where officials verified identities, where volunteers handed out supplies and information, where someone was handing out bags. "He's detecting another transmitter," Dmytro said, voice tight. "Active, broadcasting now." They moved quickly, Rex leading them through the crowd. People parted instinctively, sensing the urgency in the K9 handler's posture, the tension radiating from the dog. They reached the coordination tent, just as a middle-aged woman in a Red Cross vest was handing a canvas bag to a young mother holding an infant. "Official documents," the woman was saying, her Ukrainian perfect, her smile warm and reassuring. "Keep them safe. You'll need them at the reception center." Rex lunged forward, barking, sharp, urgent, the alert signal he'd been trained to give when detecting electronics. The woman in the Red Cross vest looked up, her expression shifting from helpful volunteer to something else, something cold and calculating. For a split second, she and Dmytro locked eyes, and understanding passed between them. She ran, dropped the bag and bolted into the crowd, shoving people aside, moving with the desperate speed of someone who knew exactly what capture would mean. Dmytro pursued, shouting for her to stop. Weapon drawn but unable to fire into the dense crowd of civilians. Rex didn't hesitate. The dog launched after the fleeing woman, faster than any human, weaving through the crowd with precision, born from years of training. Katya grabbed the abandoned bag, opened it with shaking hands. Inside, documents that looked official, and beneath them, wrapped in cloth, another transmitter, identical to the one her mother had carried. Still active, still broadcasting their position to Russian artillery spotters. The young mother with the infant stared at Katya, comprehension dawning slowly, horror replacing confusion. "What is that? What was she giving me?" Katya couldn't answer, couldn't find words for the betrayal, for the calculated cruelty of turning mothers into targets, of weaponizing trust and desperation. The unmasking Rex brought the woman down 30 meters from the tent, his teeth closing on her sleeve, dragging her to the ground without breaking skin, trained to subdue, not to kill. By the time Dmytro reached them, a crowd had gathered. Refugees who'd been waiting for evacuation buses, soldiers providing perimeter security, volunteers who'd worked alongside the woman for days. "Get her up," Dmytro commanded. The woman, 50s, grey-haired, with the kind of face that looked like someone's aunt or grandmother, stood slowly, hands raised, her expression shifting between fear and defiance. Blood ran from her nose where she'd hit the ground, but she made no move to wipe it away. "Larissa Kravitz," Dmytro said, recognition flashing across his face. "You worked intake coordination before the war. I remember you from the Kharkiv office." "I still work coordination," she said, voice steady despite her circumstances. "Just for different management now." The admission hung in the air, stark and undeniable. A soldier moved forward with restraints, but Dmytro held up a hand, stopping him. "Why? Why would you do this? These are your people. Ukrainians, families trying to survive." Larissa's laugh was bitter, empty. "My people? Where were my people when Russian forces took my son? When they gave me a choice, cooperate or watch him die?" Her voice rose, cracking. "I didn't want this. I didn't choose this. But when they put a gun to your child's head and ask you to plant some bags, to hand out some packages, what choice is there?" The crowd murmured, emotions shifting between anger and something more complicated, understanding perhaps, or the recognition that war forced impossible choices on everyone. "How many?" Dmytro's voice was quiet, dangerous. "How many transmitters did you plant?" "I don't know, 20, 30. They gave me devices. I gave them to evacuees." She looked at the ground. "I told myself they were just tracking refugees, collecting data. Not that they were—" She stopped, couldn't finish. "They were targeting families for artillery strikes," Dmytro finished for her, "using the transmitter signals to coordinate bombardment on civilian evacuation routes. You weren't just providing intelligence, you were painting targets on children." The words hit like blows. Larissa's face crumpled, defiance collapsing into something rawer, more broken. "They have my son. They still have him. If I don't cooperate—" "Your son is probably already dead," Dmytro said, voice flat with the kind of cruelty that comes from refusing to offer false comfort. "That's how they operate. They get compliance through coercion, then kill the hostages anyway because witnesses are liabilities." Larissa's knees buckled. A soldier caught her before she hit the ground, held her upright while she sobbed. Deep, wrenching sounds that carried the weight of guilt and grief, and the terrible understanding that she'd sacrificed dozens of lives trying to save one that was likely lost already. Katya watched, feeling emotions war inside her chest. Rage at what this woman had done, sympathy for the impossible position she'd been placed in, horror at the mechanisms of war that turned ordinary people into instruments of death. "Take her," Dmytro said finally, nodding to the soldiers. "Military intelligence will want to interrogate her, find out what else she knows about Russian coordination networks." As Larissa was led away, still sobbing, Katya felt a small hand slip into hers. Lena had appeared beside her, her grandmother following slowly on crutches, her ankle freshly wrapped. "Is it over?" Lena asked quietly. Katya looked at the crowd of refugees, at the buses still loading, at the coordination tent where other volunteers, innocent ones, hopefully, continued processing evacuees. At Rex, who sat beside Dmytro, panting, his work complete. "For us," she said finally, "for us it's over. The medal and the morning after." 3 weeks later, in a gymnasium converted into a temporary shelter for displaced families, Lieutenant Dmytro Kovalenko stood before a small gathering of refugees, soldiers and press and fastened a medal around Rex's neck. The medal for dedicated service, a civilian honor, not military, but one that carried weight nonetheless, the kind of recognition that acknowledged what couldn't be quantified. Lives saved through instinct, courage demonstrated through loyalty, heroism that walked on 4 paws. Cameras flashed. A journalist from Kyiv Independent asked questions about K9 training protocols and whether other units had dogs with similar capabilities. Dmytro answered patiently, professionally, but his hand never left Rex's head, fingers buried in thick fur. Katya stood in the crowd with Lena and Helena, watching. Her mother's ankle had healed enough to allow limited mobility, though the doctors said full recovery would take months. They'd been assigned temporary housing in Lviv, a single room in a converted school, shared bathroom down the hall, nothing like the apartment they'd left behind, but infinitely better than the alternative. After the ceremony, Dmytro approached them, Rex walking beside him. The dog's tail wagged when he saw Lena, and the girl knelt immediately, wrapping her arms around his neck. "He likes you," Dmytro said, smiling. "Doesn't usually warm to strangers this fast." "He saved us," Lena said simply. "Of course he likes us. We're friends now." Dmytro looked at Katya. I wanted to tell you, they found 17 transmitters total, recovered 14 before they could be triggered. The other 3, he paused. 7 casualties. Could have been 70 if Rex hadn't detected the pattern, if he hadn't found your mother when he did. Katya felt tears prick her eyes. 7 people dead because of one woman's impossible choice, because of a war that created such choices in the first place, but dozens more alive because a dog had decided to track a signal instead of returning to his handler, because instinct had overridden training in service of a higher mission. What happened to Larissa? She asked. The woman who planted them. Military tribunal. She's cooperating fully, providing intelligence on Russian coordination networks. Dimitro's expression was neutral. Her son was found 2 days ago, alive, in a detention facility near Donetsk. The Russians had been using him exactly as she feared, leverage to ensure compliance. So she was right. Cooperating saved his life. Maybe. Or maybe he would have survived anyway. Or maybe her cooperation prolonged his captivity by making her valuable to maintain. Dimitro shook his head. War doesn't deal in clear answers, only consequences. Helena had been silent through the exchange, but now she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of 7 decades of survival and witness. I carried death on my back, walked through the city broadcasting my own execution, and I had no idea. She looked at Rex. If not for him. But he did, Katya said firmly. He found you. He led us to you. He saved all of us. Rex wagged his tail as if to say, of course I did. That's what I do. What we carry that night, after Lena had fallen asleep clutching her one-eared rabbit, Katya stood at the window of their temporary housing, looking out at Lviv's streets. The city was quieter than Bakhmut had been, further from the front lines, but the war's presence was unmistakable. In the checkpoints on corners, in the blackout curtains residents kept ready, in the tension that never quite left people's shoulders. She thought about the bag, about how something so ordinary, canvas and cloth and innocent-looking documents, could be weaponized, could be turned into an instrument of targeted killing, about how trust could be exploited, how desperation could be manipulated, how war created opportunities for betrayal that peacetime would never allow. But she also thought about Rex, about a dog who'd chosen to help strangers instead of waiting for his handler's commands, about instinct recognizing danger even when logic couldn't explain why, about the capacity for loyalty that existed in creatures who couldn't speak but communicated in ways that transcended language. Mama? Lena's voice came from the darkness. Are you okay? Katya turned, found her daughter sitting up in bed, backlit by the dim light from the hallway. Yes, Malyash, I'm okay. I keep thinking about that dog, about how he knew things we didn't know, how he could smell danger. I think about that too. Do you think... Lena paused, searching for words. Do you think people can learn to do that? To trust the feeling that something's wrong even when everything looks normal? Katya across the room sat on the edge of her daughter's bed. I think we have to. I think that's one of the things war teaches us. That danger doesn't always announce itself with sirens and explosions. Sometimes it comes disguised as help, as kindness, as a bag full of documents handed to you by someone who looks like they're trying to save you. That's scary. It is. But it's also hopeful, because if danger can hide in ordinary things, then safety can too. Courage can look like a dog who refuses to abandon his mission. Love can look like a family that won't leave anyone behind, even when leaving would be easier. Lena was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, I want to work with dogs when I grow up, like Lieutenant Kovalenko. I want to train them to save people. Katya felt her throat tighten with emotion. I think that's a beautiful idea. Do you think Grandma will be okay, really okay? Her ankle will heal, but what she feels inside, Katya chose her words carefully, that takes longer. She carried something terrible without knowing it. She'll have to find a way to forgive herself for that, even though it wasn't her fault. It was that woman's fault, Larissa. It was war's fault, Katya corrected gently. War puts people in impossible positions and then judges them for the choices they make. Larissa did something terrible, but she did it because they were torturing her son. Does that make it forgivable? I don't know, but it makes it understandable. She pulled Lena close, feeling the warmth of her daughter's small body, the steady rhythm of her breathing. They'd survived. Against probability, against design, against the deliberate malice of people who'd turned evacuation routes into kill zones. They'd survived. Because a dog had decided their lives mattered more than his own safety. Because instinct had proven stronger than training. Because sometimes, the only thing standing between you and disaster is a creature that refuses to give up, even when giving up would be easier. For you might think this story is about war, about evacuation and betrayal, and the mechanics of survival in impossible circumstances. But it's not. Not really. It's about trust, about the voices that warn you through animal behavior, through instinct, through the feeling in your gut that something is wrong even when everything appears normal. It's about listening to those voices, instead of dismissing them as paranoia or fear or irrationality. How many times have you ignored that whisper? That sense that something feels off, that the situation isn't what it appears to be, that the help being offered carries a cost you can't see yet. Katya almost died because she trusted the official-looking bag, the authoritative volunteer, the surface appearance of legitimacy. She survived because she trusted a dog's behavior over her own logical assessment of the situation. That's the lesson. Not to be paranoid, not to trust no one, but to trust the signals that precede conscious thought, the instincts that evolution built into us, that animals still retain but humans often suppress in favor of social convenience or rational explanation. The next time something feels wrong, even if you can't articulate why, even if everyone around you says you're overreacting, even if logic suggests you're being foolish, pay attention anyway. Listen to the voice that doesn't use words. Trust the warning that comes from deeper than thought. Honor the part of yourself that still knows how to sense danger, the way Rex sensed that transmitter, not through analysis, but through recognition at a level consciousness can't access. Because sometimes what looks like help is actually a trap. Sometimes the official uniform hides a collaborator. Sometimes the bag that's supposed to save you is actually painting a target on your back. And sometimes, often in fact, the creatures we think we're protecting are actually the ones protecting us. The dog who leads you away from danger, even when you don't understand why. The instinct that screams stop even when logic says go. The loyalty that refuses to abandon you, even when abandonment would be easier, safer, more rational. That's not just survival strategy. That's love in its purest form, the kind that acts without expecting reward, that protects without demanding recognition, that saves lives simply because saving lives is what it was born to do. Rex didn't rescue Katya's family because he expected a medal. He did it because that's who he was, a creature built for purpose, trained for mission, driven by instincts older and wiser than any human command structure. When you strip away language and logic and all the complicated ways humans justify their choices, what you're left with is simple. Some creatures are born knowing how to protect, born understanding that the vulnerable need defending, born with the courage to run into fire when everyone else is running away. And the rest of us, we're born with the capacity to recognize that courage, to follow when it leads, to trust when it warns, to survive because we were humble enough to listen to wisdom that came without words. So pay attention to the dogs who refuse to move forward, to the instincts that whisper warnings, to the feelings you can't explain but can't ignore. Because sometimes, the only thing standing between you and disaster is the willingness to trust what you sense over what you see. Sometimes salvation wears fur and walks on four paws. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is follow the creature that knows the path, even when you can't see where it leads. And sometimes, more often than we acknowledge, the heroes aren't the ones with uniforms and weapons. They're the ones with amber eyes and loyal hearts, who track danger through smoke and chaos, who carry the wounded on their backs, who refuse to give up even when giving up would be easier. They're the ones who remind us that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and acting anyway. It's about recognizing danger and running toward it instead of away. It's about saving lives because that's what heroes do, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4.